such a pleasure to be here today. And starting with that, the poem you read, one of my favorite poets, Mary Oliver, and the song you sang, engineer by day and fabulous singer by night. That's talent. That's just typical Silicon Valley. People are so multi-talented here, but thank you for that beautiful song, which could have been written by a wife or a child. And it's about keeping the silence and about the journey. There's so much I want to tell you just based on those two events that just happened. This journey, I'm working with a lady today who flew across the country to come and get help with my program after seeing me on Megyn Kelly Today Show. She said there's finally somebody that gets it, that understands that not all abuse is fists and broken bones, bruises and broken bones. You do the most damage with words, with taking somebody's power away, with manipulating their perception of reality, with making them feel they're crazy over time. That's what does the most damage. And you can't pick up a phone and say, help, bring the police, please. My husband is assaulting my soul. And it can happen to men as well, because women can be perpetrators and men can be victims, but it's because most of the abuse happens as reported to women by men. That's why when I tell my stories, I'll get into them in a minute, I'll use he for the perpetrator and she for the victim, but I do want to acknowledge that men can be victims by same-sex or their wives, partners, and women can be perpetrators. So my program is called Women of Silicon Valley, Women SV, and let me turn this puppy on. Haley talked a little bit about the sorts of things I do. I do a lot of work out in the community to raise awareness about this issue, do a lot of interviews. This year's been a great year for getting the word out. The Megyn Kelly Today Show, Good Morning America, the New York Times. People are starting to talk about domestic violence in the more affluent areas, and I'm really happy to be part of that. I do presentations in the community like this one, like the Los Altos History Museum. They talked about Juana Briones this summer, and because she was a domestic violence survivor, they invited me to come in and do a presentation for the high school students. So presentations and trainings. Just a few disclaimers. I'm not an attorney. I'm not a therapist. I do trainings for attorneys and therapists. And I'm going to be talking about a small subset of the professional community. I hope we can all agree that I hope, you're the experts here, but I would like to hope that most people in the world are good people. If they weren't, wouldn't we need more than 3 police officers on duty at any given time in Los Altos? Most people are well behaved. But I'm talking about that small subset, the outliers, that abuse their power and their wealth and their image and their social status. I'll tell you some stories because I'm Irish and I can't help it, but I will change the details to protect the guilty and the innocent. I've talked about acknowledging that men can be victims and women can be perpetrators, and that's really important to do. But because 85 to 95% of victims are female, as reported, that's to explain the use of my pronoun he for perpetrator and she for victim or survivor. And the information I'll be sharing with you comes as a result of working with over 1,200 survivors in the past 7 years. About 8 men, and so the vast majority of them women, but men do call me as well. But these are stories, and they're going to sound anecdotal, and they are, but it's because we do tend to lack research on this population. Why? Because we think it doesn't happen there. Good morning. Welcome. And why do we think it doesn't happen? Because where do we get our data? We get our data from police stations and hospitals and domestic violence shelters, the very places where the women, the survivors in this population are not going to reach out to for help. So it gives us a skewed perception of what the statistics are. In this area, there's a huge stigma attached to domestic violence and that code of silence that prevails that keeps them from reaching out as well. So let's just, maybe we can agree on, good morning, agree on the definition of domestic violence. It's basically the dynamics, the core underlying dynamics, no matter what economic area you come from, are power and control, the abuse of power in order to control another person. And we tend to think about it in terms of that physical use of power, but it can mean other forms of power as well. Any behaviors that intimidate, manipulate, isolate, frighten, terrorize, coerce, threaten, blame. You see, I didn't have to touch my partner in order to do all those things. Has anybody seen Big Little Lies? Very interesting, compelling mini-series starring Nicole Kidman and Laura Dern about abuse in the affluent community. It's a global epidemic. I'm so glad that you all have invited me to talk about this today because you're concerned about making the world a better place. The world suffers from domestic violence. 1 in 3 women will be raped or beaten during her lifetime. 1 in 3 women on the planet. Just a few more high-profile survivors here and relatives of survivors. Former Secretary of Labor, her niece was a sexual assault victim. Her sister is a survivor of domestic violence, and yet Hilda Solis, now LA County Supervisor, says we have more shelters for pets in this country than we do for women. Something is wrong, very wrong here. Other high-profile people who have experienced domestic violence or sexual assault, this is Connie Chung at the hands of her physician. Liz Niss just came out recently acknowledging that she's a sexual assault survivor. Mayor of Palo Alto happened to her on the job as one of the incidents and assaulted by a pilot. Gloria Allred, one of the things that sparked her interest in defending survivors of trauma was her own rape that happened when she was a young woman and resulted in her becoming pregnant. And when she went to get that taken care of, the nurse said, well, that'll teach you a lesson. Total ignorance, lack of understanding, compassion. And of course, we all know that sometimes it feels like we haven't made a lot of progress. Anita Hill and Christine Blasey Ford. The underlying dynamics, power and control expressed in many different areas. One small part of it is using the fists, but intimidating a partner, attacking her verbally, isolating her, minimizing the abuse, or saying, oh, I didn't push you, you fell, or oh, you know, it hurts my feelings when you make fun of my cooking, when, you know, especially when we have guests over. I would never do that. I would never do that. What are you talking about? Denying it, or, oh, what's the matter with you? You're so sensitive, can't you take a joke? Minimizing, turning it around on her, making her the problem, using children, undermining the relationship with children, abusing the authority, turning into a boss or a dictator in the house, putting her on an allowance, economic control, making her feel afraid, punching the wall beside her with the implication that the wall first, but watch your step or you'll be next. You don't even have to do it physically, but just, you don't want to see me mad, or you don't want to know what's going to happen if you don't. Isolating her, so hi, good morning. Isolation is a key component, often in domestic abuse relationships, separating her from her ability to check out her story, her new reality, with a healthier environment. So a lady came into my group and she was saying, you know, he wakes me up every morning at 2 o'clock in the morning and he rants and raves for several hours and I have to get up and go to work. She's a physician, and how can you concentrate, you know, when you're dealing with people whose lives are in your hands, but her husband is waking her up every night at 2 in the morning. And then somebody else in the group says, what, you mean that's not normal? My husband does that all the time. So you see, by sharing stories, checking it out, you hear from other women, yes, it's happening to you, and no, it's not normal. It's become your new normal. That doesn't make it healthy or right. We tend to have less sympathy for people in this demographic, but it doesn't matter if you're in a tiny little apartment or on a huge 5-acre estate. I've had ladies who've lived on these 5-acre estates, and they say, there is no one there to hear you scream. There are places there that don't get cell phone coverage. You can be a prisoner in a tiny apartment or a mansion the terror, the pain, the fear are the same. This term coercive control was coined by a sociologist, Evan Stark, who is working very hard to help people understand that physical blows are the easy way to control someone. It's the more complex, the more sophisticated, the more subtle forms that we need to talk about and that do the most damage. Those subtle forms can be punctuated by the odd blow, and it only has to happen once for always the threat to be present from there on. But the real damage is done by living in a home environment that's supposed to be safe, that's supposed to be your sanctuary, that is turned into a war zone, where you have to watch your every move, your every word, and you don't know when the next bomb is going to go off, verbal, emotional, or physical. So the show of violence, if I'm John's partner, I can punch the wall beside him and give him a message, right? I can tower over him. I can blame him, degrade him, undermine the relationship with our children. I can isolate him so he's not able to see his friends or have his family, extended family over. I can wake him up at 2 in the morning and rant and rave at him. So with these next few, I had a lady who lived in a beautiful home, 2 stories, and the main floor, the bathroom was reserved for servants, the nanny. Her husband forced her to use only that bathroom, and he would never let her have toilet paper in the bathroom. And he would barge into the bathroom while she was using the facilities, tower over her, and rant and rave at her. So you see all the different types of abuse we get with just that one act. Invading her boundaries, humiliating her, towering over her, intimidating her, barring access to basic resources like toilet paper. And so here with Evan Stark, he's such a pioneer in this field. He wants us to talk about this type of abuse as sort of a crime, a liberty crime. Because really what's happening is a woman's liberty is being taken away from her. Everybody has the fundamental human right to live in peace and safety and freedom in their own home. And that right is violated whenever there is coercive control, whenever there is the abuse of power over someone else. And it's exactly what happens to hostages or prisoners of war, this crime of liberty. It's not like it's one blow, one killing blow. You know that Asian saying, death by 1,000 cuts? It's chip, 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 chip away their self-esteem, their identity, their confidence, their sense of who they are. And so is it any wonder they have similar side effects, similar symptoms, anxiety, depression, PTSD, the same symptoms experienced by prisoners of war, hostages, women and children in abusive situations. The power and control she had over her own life slips away, and she is left in a home that should be her sanctuary, but is turned into a prison. That's why the logo on my brochure and on my website is the bird fleeing the gilded cage. It's not just an adult issue. The song that John sang, so it was originally meant to have you think about a child growing up in an environment like this, but John was saying this name is, I want to say ambidextrous, but sort of ambivalent. It could be, it doesn't, sort of gender non-specific, Luca. It could have been a child, it could have been a wife, it could have been an elderly person being abused by her child. We like to think about, or we do tend to think about domestic violence as being an adult issue, but it impacts children so severely. They are the ultimate prisoners of war. Who speaks for the children? It's like Dr. Seuss, who speaks for the trees? We need a Lorax for our children. They are afraid often to reach out for help. I was a teacher before becoming a domestic violence advocate. I was a mandated reporter. It was hard for me to ask difficult questions because I could get very difficult answers, and I'd have to take very difficult steps as a result of it. As a domestic violence advocate, I've had to make numerous reports to CPS after the stories that I've been told. Many children don't want to tell that story. They don't want CPS involved. They don't want dad getting even angry at them.
CPS is Child Protective Services?
Thank you. Yeah, CPS. Yes. It's the Department of Family and Children Services now. It's a current term, DFCS.
Could you explain what mandated reporter means?
Oh,
I think
yes.
I know.
Yes. It's by law that you have to report certain cases of abuse. And the requirements vary depending on what profession you're in. If a woman is being physically abused and she goes to her physician, goes to the ER, if they see visible injuries, they're going to have to call the police. If a child is in school and tells a teacher that she's a victim of abuse, or he is a victim of abuse, she'll have to call CPS or DFCS. If a therapist is told by a child that she's or he is experiencing abuse, she'll have to call CPS or DFCS. Attorneys are not mandated reporters, so you can pretty much tell them that you did terrible things. I think if you're planning to kill somebody, there's a duty to warn. But different occupations have different levels of expectations when it comes to reporting the abuse. But you see how that can get flipped on its head. If CPS responds too soon before she's made her plans to leave and got all her ducks in a row, all it's going to succeed in doing is making him angrier and having him pull the bars even tighter on the cage. So when you leave an abuser, it has to be done systematically, lining everything up so it's executed in a domino kind of fashion. The most common reason why a woman stays in an abusive situation, one of the most, is financial, and that's one of the reasons why she returns. This poem that you read, Mark, at the beginning, The Journey, could have been written by the lady that I was just working with yesterday. She flew across the country after seeing me on the Megyn Kelly Today show, and after fleeing to a shelter, she said, nobody got it at the shelter. People out on the east side of the country or in different, smaller towns, they don't understand this more subtle form of abuse. Her husband never beat her. It was all about stalking her, surveilling her. He works in the high-tech field, so he was able to put devices in the home and in the car so that he could track her, he could record the conversations, he knew her every move. And you can imagine the impact that would have on somebody's psyche, on their demeanor when they are being stalked like that 24/7. Meanwhile, he's an upstanding member of the community, pillar of society, well respected, highly regarded in his field, an expert in his area. So you have this image of somebody that has this public persona, and then this woman living like a prisoner, feeling crazy and acting a little scattered because of what she's been through. So she flew with her remaining cash across the country to start her life anew here, hoping to get some help from our program. And I'm hoping as a sort of a community we can all pull together to help her. I have a lot of resources, but we can talk about ways to help people like this later on. But the bullying that starts on the playground with somebody picking a fight with somebody else, it could happen as a result of watching the wrong thing on TV or falling in with the wrong crowd. But sometimes little boy bullies or little girl bullies are imitating the behavior that they're seeing at home. That can turn into teen dating violence. Over time, in college, many of us know that 1 in 5 women will be a victim of assault, sexual assault in college. 1 in 5 women will be a victim of domestic violence. Intimate partner violence in college. You have more to fear from your partner than from a stranger. And over time, it can turn into elder abuse. I've had women who've been terribly abused by their children and by their partners. So, public perception that it doesn't happen in our part of town is wrong. And we think, it either doesn't happen, or if it does, well, she must have the money, the resources to look after it herself. Not true. Not true at all. In some cases, she is the primary breadwinner, or earning, a decent salary. She could still be going home to a husband who is terrorizing her and threatening her. But there are many, many more women who've had their finances completely taken over by their partner. He seized control of everything. And sometimes she just leaves, like my lady yesterday, with a shirt on her back. Anybody can be a victim. Anybody can be a perpetrator. Here are my folks that I work with. I say clients, but I should really say survivors, because I don't charge people for services. Going back to my belief, the fundamental core belief of my program is that everybody deserves to live in peace and safety and freedom in their home, and you shouldn't have to pay to exercise that right. Just like you don't get a bill from the police if they need to come to your home. So the ladies that I work with are doctors, lawyers, engineers, psychologists, entrepreneurs, CEOs, religious leaders, stay-at-home parents. They're abusive partners, doctors, lawyers, engineers, psychologists, religious leaders. And in a way, these are the most sort of nefarious types of abuse perpetrated by people that have sworn some kind of oath that they will heal, that they will help, that they will protect. And then they turn that on its head and use their skills to manipulate, to coerce, to control. And over time, you can destroy someone doing that. Doesn't matter what area you come from, power and control dynamics are the same. But the more money you have, the more power, the more education, the more intelligence, the more sophistication you have, the more tools you have at your disposal to exercise that power and control. When you have money, wealth, status, prestige, and technical savvy, we'll take a look at that in a moment, it makes it much harder for a woman to leave safely, stay safe, to keep custody of her children, or maintain a standard of living anything like what she enjoyed before. The culture of affluence. We all come from different cultures, right? So as I said, I'm Irish and Scottish, so I like a good pint of Guinness, and I like to tell a good story. But depending on the culture you come from, there's different expectations, taboos, pressures. If you come from a wealthy background, there is this idea that you are going to go to a good school, you're going to pick up a sport and excel at it, you're not going to air your dirty laundry, you're going to get good grades, you're going to pick up a good profession, meet a worthy partner, and settle down in a nice part of town. It's all about climbing that ladder of success. And what part of domestic violence fits any of that picture? It's a complete disconnect. You know this optical illusion? Can you all see the two different images? Can you see one at a time? The old crone with her hook nose and her pointed chin, and then you see the profile of the beautiful lady looking off in the distance. But how hard it is to see both of them at the same time, right? So much easier to see the old lady or the beautiful young woman. But how jarring the juxtaposition, right? George Orwell wrote a whole book about that, 1984, The Ministry of Peace. Oh, it's all about war. So what do we think of when we think of a typical abuser? Isn't it that guy in the middle? What is he wearing, for instance? What's it called? White beater, right. But all of these people up here in this rogues gallery have been found to have committed domestic violence, and some the ultimate act. This upper left-hand corner and the lower right-hand corner, these two young men actually ended up killing their college girlfriends. National lacrosse champion killed his girlfriend, who was also a national lacrosse champion. Her parents made meaning out of that tragedy by creating an application called My Plan. It's an app that college kids can download to do their own danger assessment to see what kind of level of danger they might be in. Dr. Martin McNeil, the suit, the bow tie. Who's this one? Yeah, OJ. Asia Argento, actress who was, there's an allegation that she sexually assaulted a young male actor. Bob Bashara, we'll visit him again in a moment. Wealthy entrepreneur from Silicon Valley. Do you know who this is? Chris Brown, right? Rihanna's boyfriend. But look, he's got a puppy. Ed Dow, wealthy developer, ended up killing his wife and son. Do you all remember him?
No.
Scott Peterson,
Oh.
Lacey Peterson's husband, and Ray Rice. Remember that video, cold cocking his fiancée and knocking her out in the elevator? So what are some characteristics that I have learned based on the stories that over 1,200 women and 8 men have told me over the years? Here's the profile. And if I could just ask you all to put your therapist hat on for a moment. Pretend you're therapists. And when I do trainings for therapists, they don't have to pretend. But I ask them and I ask you this morning, come back to me with the diagnostic labels you would apply to this set of characteristics. Got 2 slides coming up here, so let's take a look. Highly educated, advanced professional career, positive public image, they look good on paper, they present well in public. They're often involved in volunteer philanthropic work. They might coach their son's soccer team or give to worthy causes. Charming, calculating, manipulative. They come from all races, all religions, all cultural backgrounds. They tend to define their children in terms of their GPA, their accomplishments. Here are the things that motivate them: sex, money, winning at all costs. And it's not enough for them to win. Everybody else must fail. Revenge. They have long memories, and they are very vengeful. Power and control. This sense of it's all about them. The world revolves around them. They want to be the center of attention. Very good at convincing others that their partner's crazy or abusive. They turn it on them. You've got to examine the history, the context to really get at the truth. Now, this is key in terms of the diagnostic label here. They tend to lack empathy. They tend to lack remorse. They tend not to do self-reflection. They're not looking in, they're projecting it onto their partner. They tend to lack any sense of conscience or moral maturity. They often almost seem to enjoy causing pain to the very people they should be protecting. They lie easily, often, convincingly, even when they don't need to. It's like they just want to keep in practice. They include precise details in with their lives to make the lives look more authentic. They blame their partners for everything. This total lack of self-reflection or accountability. They never acknowledge their own abusive behavior. They would be the last ones to label themselves an abuser. They're very good at playing the victim. They're good at shaming others, but God forbid you should shame them. You could be taking your life in your hands if you shame an abuser. I had one of my ladies was suspecting that her high-powered husband was leading a double life with another man, and one night she asked him, "Are you gay?" That was the first time he strangled her. Turned out he was, but you do not want to ever confront an abuser or shame them. They tend to view relationships in terms of war, business, and chess. So war, they will destroy anything that gets in their way that is deemed the enemy, and she will become the enemy. Let's take no prisoners. Business, viewing people in terms of like, what's my return on investment here? What's my ROI on you? What have you done for me lately? Oh, so what? You were having to undergo chemo. Get the dinner on the table on time. They will be brought up for performance review every so often, and God forbid they should not meet expectations. They could get fired and replaced with a newer model. And chess, very good at thinking several steps ahead. So any thoughts that come to mind, diagnostic labels that you might think of applying to this?
Narcissistic.
Narcissistic, thank you. Anybody else? Anything else?
Sociopath.
Thank you very much. Yay, bingo, 2 for 2. Yeah. Not all psychopaths and sociopaths are running around robbing banks and being serial killers. Some of them are doctors, lawyers, engineers, businessmen. He says, "How could I kill my wife? I'm president of the Rotary Club." Huh, that's what he called himself. Well, here's what a jury member called him after he was found guilty of paying his handyman to kill his wife. Monster, narcissist, sociopath, master manipulator, arrogant, pathological liar. Here's what his dead wife's sister said about Bob. Jane, the woman that he killed, supported him, and she would have done just about anything for him except open up her 401k. That reluctance to give up her life savings that ultimately led Bob to kill her. Follow the money, and you will often follow the motivation. Domestic violence and the ultimate act can happen to anyone, just in our local area. These are all Kaiser employees who were killed by their partner. They look like a domestic violence victim or survivor looks like anybody else. Remember I pointed out the young man in the upper left-hand corner? That was the college student that he killed. Remember I pointed out the young gentleman in the lower right-hand corner? That was his girlfriend, Yardley Love, that he killed. There's Brianna. You all recognize her? OJ's wife, Nicole Simpson. Ed Dow, the wealthy developer, this is his wife and daughter, the one who ended up killing himself and his son. And Miss America, victim of domestic violence. Leslie Morgan Steiner, best-selling author, Harvard grad, domestic violence survivor. You can see her TED Talk. And Neha Rastogi, did you all hear about that case? She was high up at Apple, and her husband was high up at Cisco. They were high-level executives, and she had a question about a bug she found on a website one night, and she filmed him, unbeknownst to him, slapping her repeatedly, turning it into a torture session because she wasn't able to figure out this bug on a website. That case went viral because of the light sentencing that happened due to his immigration status. And it was that case that prompted the Megyn Kelly Today Show to call me and invite me onto their show. Another example, Apple executive Juliana killed by her husband Christmas Eve. So when we talked about what domestic violence perpetrators look like, what do survivors look like, they often look frazzled, fragmented, the deer in the headlights look. They can be scattered in the way they're expressing themselves. They often leave out important details. One lady, I took her to the police station and she forgot to mention that her husband had said he was going to run over her that afternoon with his car. And it's because she was busy thinking about how he had strangled her a couple of weeks before that. So they could explain away the abuse, just say it was stress or alcohol or he didn't really mean it. They often minimize the abuse or deny it. And they often retract their statements later, go sideways, even if they want to press charges. Initially, they'll often change their minds for many reasons, and they may not have told anyone. And they may be working well below their professional capacity because of what they've been through. They also, on the other hand, might be taking on great responsibility, and they might be looking like they're performing very well, and you'd never guess. They're able to compartmentalize. The smarter they are, the longer they tend to stay, thinking there's something that they can do to figure it out. The danger actually increases after they leave. One of my ladies, her partner actually ended up killing himself and their child. This was another one. After she left, this happened 25 years ago and it still haunts her. The danger increases after they leave. Why? Because he's losing power over her, and often they'll do whatever it takes to get that power back. So emotional abuse, what does that look like? This is what causes scars that can last a lifetime. It's the most damaging form of abuse. It can start with a little disapproving look. Oh, are you really going to wear that dress tonight? I don't really think blue's your color. You really think you're ready for that job promotion? Oh, I can't believe you said that about me to our friends when they were over the other night. I didn't deserve that. You're not supporting me. Oh, what's the matter with you? Can't you even make dinner right? Or, boy, you're really getting stupid. You're really losing it. I'm starting to worry about your sanity. You feel the escalation of this over time until he's ranting and raving and accusing her of all kinds of things. So one of my ladies was asked by her attorney, why don't you let me fight harder to get a fair settlement for you? I could get so much more for you than you're letting me go after. And she said, well, she was still living with her husband, the physician. Why? Because he had taken control of all the finances and she didn't have the money to move out. So she said, you know what he said to me the other night over dinner? He said, do you know there's more than 40 ways to kill a woman and make it look like she died from natural causes? He didn't say, I'm going to run over you with my car this afternoon, right? He didn't have to. She totally backed away, settled for much less than she was entitled to. I have other stories I'll tell if there's time, but those are stories. This one made the news. Remember I pointed out Dr. Martin McNeil with his bow tie? He would brag about being able to kill someone and make it look like natural causes. It was an almost perfect murder. They did determine that he had pumped her full of drugs that would try to make it look like she died of a heart attack, but not really. And even his own daughter said afterwards, we're just so glad he can't hurt anyone else. So he was brought to justice and ended up committing suicide in prison. Perpetrator's MO is often about trying to minimize it, trying to get her and the world to not acknowledge it, to forget, to not pay attention, to silence her, or if she starts to talk, to discredit her, to make people not believe what she has to say, to destroy her credibility. And what better way to do that than by making her look crazy? So one of my other ladies was married to a therapist. And she said, the last time my husband tried to kill me, I told him I wanted a divorce. And he spent the night chasing me around, had a knife, was breaking plates. The place was turned into just a war zone. She called the police. He got out on the driveway to the police before they got inside. And he said to the police, "Thank God you're here. I'm a therapist. I believe my wife is having another one of her psychotic meltdowns. Please help me to help her." The police go in. They see her like this, right? Scattered, hysterical, as they would say. She gets slapped in restraints, carted off to a locked psychiatric unit on a 5150 hold for observation. And when he comes to visit her there, she says to him, "Why did you do that?" And you know what he says? "Because I can." So you see that type of abuse on so many different levels. Prior to that, he was abusing his therapeutic skills to get inside her head and do gaslighting on a very subtle, sophisticated level, making her really doubt her own sanity, her memory, and destroying her confidence. But when that moment of truth came along, here he took his credential as a licensed therapist and used that to convince the police that she needed to be on a hold, deprived her of her fundamental right to liberty in one of the worst ways possible. I've had ladies who've ended up going to jail as a result of being framed. Does everybody know the term gaslighting? Gaslight? Anybody not know the term? If you get a chance to see the movie Gaslight, fabulous movie with Ingrid Bergman. See the Ingrid Bergman version. That's the best one. It's a tactic that has to do with getting inside someone's head and over time making them doubt their memory, done long enough, their sanity. So she comes home and she knows she always puts her keys here. And then one day she puts her keys in the regular place. Then she comes back and they're not there. And she says, "Oh, honey, have you seen my keys?" "No." A couple hours later, keys are back. And she says, "Isn't that strange? The keys, like, there they are." And he goes, "Well, what? You can't even keep track of your keys anymore? What's wrong with your memory?" Something like this happened to my lady who flew out across the coast. She took some sensitive documents and put them in a lockbox and tucked them in the back of a drawer in her bedroom when her husband was away at work. The next day, she went to look and those documents were gone. A couple of days later, she looks at a pair of pants that she's just bought with the tag still on them, and the documents are stuffed into the pockets of her pants. That is gaslighting. And that's also telling you that how did he know where the keys were, or the documents, how did he know? Turned out he had a hidden camera in the fan in the ceiling. So it can be done with technology. Woo! There's my technology. So one of my ladies was an absolute prisoner in her own home. She had these electronic locks on their fancy home, and he would change the passcode to the locks, locking her on the inside every day so she couldn't get out. One of my other ladies wondered, how is he able to get inside my place? And all the hard evidence of the abuse disappeared. No sign of forcible entry. He was using something called a bump key. It's like modern day skeleton key. One of my other ladies, if you can imagine, pursued by a drone, a small drone. Speaking of technology, companies are not looking at the ways technology can be abused. They are designing it with making life easier for the average person and making the average person feel more secure so that we don't worry about Susie coming home from the prom. We're not thinking about how it can be flipped on its head and used as a tool to coerce, control, monitor, surveil, terrorize. So just one other story here. One of my ladies, she was a therapist from Southern California. She came up to our area fleeing her husband. She had that look in her eyes when I first saw her, the deer in the headlights, the look of terror. He was in the high-tech industry, in the surveillance industry. She was driving one of these fancy cars that, as she calls them, it's a computer on wheels nowadays, right? That's what the new models are. She was using a voice-activated command to give directions to her GPS system to take her somewhere in the Bay Area. Her voice-activated command gets overridden remotely by her husband's voice, sending her back to Southern California. How freaky is that? How terrifying is that? And how does the average person go in and explain that to the average police officer without looking a little batty? It's so much easier to think she's crazy than that something this subtle and sophisticated and devious is going on. You know that principle, Occam's razor? You know, if you're given a lot of different possibilities, maybe go with the simplest explanation. That so is not the case, should not be the case here. And even Stanford physicians, I've heard them say, you know, when we hear hoofbeats, we think zebras, not horses. I mean, horses would be the sort of logical average deduction to make, right? But they go that extra step. It could be something exotic. It could be something, if we just did a little more digging, we could find out that there's something more complex going on here. Sometimes when you think your every move is being watched, it's because it is. So here are just some things to think about. If in your own life, in your own personal sphere, in your work sphere, in your community, if you can just kind of keep some of these questions in mind, if there's anybody you're concerned about, maybe one of your children or relatives, because you may find a child, your own grown child is experiencing it, and she hasn't said anything to you. Maybe you haven't seen her lately, or she's been keeping to herself more. Even adults are very good at keeping secrets, especially if there's a lot at stake. Does she seem to be afraid of her partner? Is she always very anxious to please and keep the peace? Has she stopped seeing her friends or family? Does she cut conversations short when he enters the room? Does he often criticize or humiliate her in front of other people? Does he pressure her to do sexual things? Rape isn't just about physically forcing yourself on somebody. It's also if she feels she must succumb, otherwise they'll be held to pay afterwards, or he'll take it out on the children. Does he order her around, make all the decisions, control all the money, tell her who she can see or what she can do? Does she every now and again say something about him being moody or jealous or bad-tempered or possessive? Does he give her the silent treatment, shunning her? I call that silent violence. You know, children actually fare better when they're beaten than when they're being neglected. So punishing is it to be ignored, to be shunned. Why do you think the Amish use it as a punishment? She may, if it's the more obvious form of abuse, she may be wearing sweaters in the summer to cover things up, or a lot of makeup. Is she missing work or school? Has there been a change in her outside activities, her hobbies? Does she seem depressed, withdrawn, distracted? She could be going to the doctor and getting treatment for anxiety, depression, self-medicating by using alcohol or prescription medication. She could have put on a lot of weight. She could have lost a lot of weight. All of these things could be problems in themselves that could be treated in themselves, but they could be symptoms of something else that's going on underneath. Has there been a change in her? She lost that sparkle in her eye. She losing her confidence, her self-esteem. One of my ladies said she ran a whole HR department in a company you'd know the name of. She said, I used to be smart. I call that trauma brain. When people get cancer and they go through chemo, there's something called a phenomenon called chemo brain. You're just not thinking, you're not yourself. Same with trauma. Has that impact on you? Do her children seem like they're afraid of dad? Are they having behavior problems at school? ADD, ADHD, these are behavioral diagnoses. And it could be because their brain just works differently. That's a legitimate explanation. It could also be the fact that they're distracted, having behavior issues, withdrawn, not concentrating on their work. They could be thinking about the stuff that's going on at home. Does mom seem reluctant to leave her children with her partner? Whenever she is away, is he always calling her? Does he make her FaceTime him at work to prove that she's not out with somebody else? Does she seem afraid? Or is she very good at hiding it and seems very confident? These are indicators, but sometimes they're very good at covering up what's going on. Here's some things you can say to somebody you're concerned about. I'm concerned for your safety. I'm concerned for your children's safety. I'm concerned it will only get worse. Abuse typically gets worse until somebody dies or her spirit dies. You don't deserve to be abused. No one deserves to be abused. They often over time will think that they're to blame, they're causing it, they're not. They don't have that power. It's his choice. Abuse is a learned behavior, and it's his choice to abuse. It's not your fault. You're not alone. They think they are. Oh, my husband's a doctor, nobody's going to believe me. You can say, I'm here to help you. I can find someone who can help. And there are resources. They can call me. Can I just ask, after everything I've said, how many of you have had some experience with intimate partner abuse of some form or other, or know somebody who's had, or can think of somebody that you think is experiencing this? Can we just look around? Whether I'm talking to 5 people or 500 people, my largest audience was 1,000, almost every single hand goes up, and you saw it here. Everybody knows somebody who's experienced this. 1 in 3 women, and we're just talking about being raped or beaten. We're not talking about coercive control. Everybody, it looks like just about everybody's experienced it in some form or other. So I have some resources here, and it's my understanding that this can go up online, or this is being filmed, so you can check out these resources online. Here, if you're worried about anybody, these are all different places they can go for help. And this, if we had some, but this is something you can see online too. I was privileged and honored to receive the Jefferson Award for Public Service from CBS. So this is just the announcement of that award. I want to thank you all today for listening to me so attentively, and I'd be happy to take any questions. Anybody have anything they want to ask or comment on?
What creates such monsters?
Aha. With my ladies, they ask that all the time, and I want to answer it briefly, and I also want to say, let's be very careful that we don't spend too much time looking at the origins and trying to understand. This is what I say to our ladies. When you have a lot of empathy and compassion and kindness and ability to forgive, you attract other people with those qualities, but you also attract people that take advantage of those qualities. So in asking the question, why does he do that, with survivors, it invites them to think, oh, well, if there's something that happened that caused him to be that way, maybe if we address that cause, he can be cured, and then we can fix our relationship and live happily ever after. Sad to say, that's typically not the case. In most cases, this type of person has grown up in a family where they've seen the way dad treats mom or the way mom treats dad. They've seen dysfunction on some kind of level, and they've learned early on that love, the kind of love that means opening your heart and being vulnerable, is a weakness. To truly love somebody, you have to be prepared to be hurt by them and trust that they won't hurt you. And when you're a little child, like Luca, and you've been hit, hurt, beaten, wounded by the first people that are supposed to take care of you in your home, you've been betrayed on the most fundamental level. And you've learned that those soft feelings are weaknesses, and it's better to attack rather than be attacked. And for that same reason, tears don't do well in an abusive relationship. If she starts to cry, that'll be seen as another form of weakness that needs to be attacked. So I think often what happens is abuse is learned early on. It's a learned behavior, and it can be unlearned over time. But if empathy has been drummed out of them early on, it's like there are, I think, certain developmental stages. And if you are not learning love and empathy and kindness at these stages, it's like your growth, emotional growth, gets stunted. I think some people are born missing the empathy gene, so they come out of the starting gate different. Did you ever see the movie The Bad Seed? Bad Seed. This cute little girl. She's got long blonde pigtails, and she's very sweet, and she's got her little crinoline skirt on, and it's all nice. And she's in 3rd or 4th grade, and everything's all good unless you cross her, and then you could end up dead. And her mom is a real sweetheart. So sometimes kids are born different, but sometimes they're born maybe with a modicum of empathy that gets drummed out of them by, well, for example, there was a serial killer who was interviewed by a forensic psychologist, and the forensic psychologist was asking him about his background. And the inmate was saying, well, when I was a little kid, my dad would bring a puppy home, and I would fall in love with that puppy, and then he'd put it in a box and he'd make me use it for target practice. So how to kill empathy in a child, right? So sometimes they're born that way. Sometimes there's a modicum of empathy that's squashed, and sometimes there's lots of empathy that gets squashed. So who can say? But it is important to spend a little bit of time thinking what causes this type of person. But they walk amongst us now, and they look like you and me, but they are not like you and me. That's how they get away with it. Yes?
On the flip side, what's your analysis of the victims in the sense of, so is the abuse, does it not happen till they're like married and financially dependent on them? Or
Yeah, great question.
is the, so I'm wondering if you had a similar analysis for the victims?
Yes. Okay, let's start with the... I say that there's two types of people who are vulnerable to getting involved with this type of abuser. The ones that grow up in healthy homes, where all they know is like treating people with love and respect and kindness and forgiveness, and so they don't have the language to put on what's happening to them, and it's because it's subtle and it's insidious, it's incremental. It's like the frog in the boiling water. Ultimately, it starts off lukewarm and it's hard to recognize. And then there's the people that grow up in unhealthy homes, or they've seen the way dad treats mom, or vice versa, and they're sort of drawn towards the familiar. So I say, please don't ever think, oh, I brought it on myself because I think I don't deserve any better. As I said, there's many women that I work with who only, the woman that I'm working with now flew across the country. All she knew was love and kindness from her parents. But they're that good, and it starts off so subtly. If we go back to the emotional abuse that starts with that disapproving look, or do you really think blue's your color, or are you ready for that job promotion? That's subtle, that's incremental, and these suggestions can be done under the guise of, I want to help you, I want to improve you. I had one of my ladies, she was a writer for a living, and she would give her work to her husband to review, and it started with, oh, maybe this is a better word here. He would be changing a word here or there, over time a sentence, over time a paragraph, and in the end she wasn't able to write at all. She was just thinking that nothing that she could put pen to paper with would satisfy him and the rest of the world. So he took her strength and chipped away at it slowly over time. Sometimes we see, it's almost like an if-then. Do we have computer programmers here? I hesitate to use computer analogies because I'm technically challenged. But let's just say, for example, with a computer program, a certain program is triggered by using if-then statements. If this set of conditions appears, then this other computer program will get triggered. And it's almost like, for example, if you've been exposed to TB, you have that latent, that dormant in your system, the TB disease, that won't get expressed unless a certain set of circumstances comes to pass. Like if you get old and your immunity is compromised, then you can end up with TB. So given a certain set of circumstances, the if-then statements can trigger different programs, which aren't visible in the beginning. And that's why it's subtle and it's complex, and they're charming, and they listen, and they have a good sense of humor, and they take you out to dinner, and they do all these nice things. It's all good. And then, you really think blue is your color? You know what you said the other night when you were talking about me to this other person? That didn't feel like you were really respecting me. This little subtle digs. Often we also see life markers, milestones, getting engaged, getting married, having children. One of the most dangerous times in a woman's relationship with an abuser is when she's pregnant. She's more. It's one of the leading causes of death when it comes to physical injury, homicide by her partner. Why? Because in a relationship like this, all the attention that's supposed to be focused on him is suddenly diverted to an interloper. Instead of a welcome addition to the family, it's this person taking attention that's supposed to be meant for only him. So yes, you sometimes see it when she stops working, when she has children, after they get married. But sometimes if you can know the signs to look for, you can get indications, pink flags early on before they become red or black later. Yes?
So I consider name-calling abuse.
I do too.
Abuse.
I do too.
And I see it coming from the very
Upper echelons, you're not going to talk about the upper echelons, are you? Don't want to get political.
No, but how do you counter that? How do we counter that in our culture? How can we, sitting here, a bunch of us, how can we counter that?
Well, let's start with that horrible saying and refute it right now. Sticks and stones may break my bones, but names will never hurt me. That is BS.
Right.
Names will break your heart. So if we can challenge these little, nursery rhymes and little sayings that paint us in a certain light, you're sort of posing such a difficult question. It's like, how do you stand up to the bully without being bullied yourself? How do you speak your truth after having been assaulted without being assaulted yourself? And that's where I think safety in numbers, where the Me Too movement has come into play. And I think we have somewhat of a sea change happening in our country now, if not the world. It's a hopeful time we live in. In the old days, women weren't allowed to gather publicly. Like, I could be arrested for public speaking in the old days. That was before the suffragette movement. Because women, when they get together, they're just troublemakers. Here comes trouble. But it's through dialogue, it's through gathering together like we are today. I hope that your awareness has been lifted up somewhat so that you're more attuned to different types of abuse. You are able to recognize it. It's one thing to recognize it. It's another thing to take action on it. The thing with taking action. Well, we saw what happened with Christine Blasey Ford, right? She was so brave to speak out, and that the counter argument is, well, where's the proof? It happened so many years ago. Why didn't she report it then? And then that sparked the "why I didn't report" movement. Thank God for the internet in some ways, right? That I think the internet can help protect us from ending up in a fascist society, because I think you're more prone to fascism when you're more isolated. When we can gather together and talk like this is how the underground resistance movement gets started. And that's kind of what I'm running. It's like kind of like an underground railroad, trying to, with myself, and I have like 30 volunteers that are helping me. I have so many wonderful, committed people, and I have people in the community that donate to the program to help keep it going. It's this building of numbers, of masses. Unfortunately, if somebody a high-powered person is name-calling, for one person to say, stop doing that, you can't do that, unfortunately, it's going to get, the attention will get spun around on you. You'll be the troublemaker. You'll be evicted from Congress or whatever, wherever you are protesting. But how do we get the right to vote? Some women died as a result of trying to get the vote for women. What about the civil rights movement? How do we get as many rights as we have today? By people gathering en masse. Look at that women's march that happened after the election. When was the last time something like that happened? There's been more donations being given to Planned Parenthood than ever before. I mean, in a way, our president is uniting the country in ways he never dreamed of. Really? Really? Well, women are coming together. The Me Too movement happened during his era. Wow! Now, maybe he will take credit for it, as it does for everything else. But let's look at the good that has come out of this. Yes, we have some very dark times that we're living in, where people can be re-victimized through seeking help. And it happens to my ladies all the time. They go to court and they end up losing custody of their children by speaking their truth. Truth becomes a weapon in the hands of an abuser, where he marshals his own high-powered attorneys around and bends it to suit his purposes. So this is an important question you're asking, and it's a question that can spark, hopefully, like a movement, a social movement, but it's not an easy answer. It's like people coming together as you are this morning and building. So we get Me Too, Time's Up, Why I Didn't Report, and all around the country we get women calling, reaching out for help, and calling a spade and saying enough, no more. Hopefully men and women coming together to rise up and say, here's how we should treat people. And it starts, I think, often, it should start in schools early on. How does a little boy treat a little girl? Can we call a little boy out to be saying, oh, you run like a girl, or stop crying, stop being such a sissy. So if we can start early on and teach children what does a healthy relationship look like, that's so fundamental. And I'm trying to do more and more of that, get into the schools. I've talked to high schools about what does a healthy relationship look like, and teen dating violence, but talking about what a healthy relationship is about two people treating each other equally, right? With respect, compassion, trust. That's love. And then we get ladies who grow up without that knowledge or having forgotten it, and they say, oh, but I still love him, or but he says he loves me. And then I invite them to think about, what does love really look like? Love is patient, love is kind, love keeps no record of wrongs, love isn't hyper jealous. There's like lots of things that love is, right? And abuse is not any of those. So if we can start early on, educate children, go upstream, and help them recognize what healthy relationships look like. They may not have one at home, but there are other options, and one day they will be free, and one day they can learn from negative example how to treat their partner. Anybody else have any other questions?
I have a question.
Yeah.
So, with the Me Too movement, there is an aspect that has concerned me a little bit, and that's sort of quick to kind of have a Twitter storm, or something where someone gets called out, and it's sort of trial by Twitter instead of having due process.
Yes.
And sort of one example that comes to mind is the Aziz Ansari story, where
Is what?
Aziz Ansari, who's an actor comedian, who was he ended up being accused of rape after what seemed like an evening where there was a miscommunication. From what I understood, it seemed like he and a woman met. He was kind of looking for a casual hookup. They maybe didn't communicate that until things went a little further than she ended up feeling comfortable with. The next day she regretted it and posted things online. It became very public very quickly. He did apologize because it was a miscommunication, and he felt sad that she was upset, but it wasn't it wasn't a clear case of sort of an assault. It was kind of people were unhappy with how things had played out. Or the woman was unhappy, but then it became public, and the conversation around it just felt a little unfair. Sort of these things do also happen in a way that's not clear-cut. Sometimes people don't communicate clearly, and people get hurt, and that's a little different from a violent assault. And I feel that sometimes they get lumped together, and also because we don't have right now, it seems that we're sort of trying to deal with the problem that sometimes victims aren't believed, but we're going in another direction of saying believe all women, but sometimes there's gray areas, and how do we deal with that?
Yeah, so Haley, I think you bring up a really important point. I guess progress is messy, and people are flawed, but if you look at the statistics, and I guess as much as we can trust statistics, that in the vast majority of cases, women are telling the truth when they come forward and talk about sexual assault. In the vast majority of cases, they're telling the truth. And in some cases, it will be overblown or exaggerated, or there'll be this sort of revenge motive. That's messy, and that's unfortunate. But I don't think it compromises the Me Too movement. It makes it more complex. And I worry that there could be a backlash that in some circles of our country, some people are saying, I feel sorry for men now. Men are being victimized. And in a way, Brett Kavanaugh became the victim, talking about his family, how victimized they had been and ruined and destroyed. And I think if we look at the large, take a view of how women have been treated over the centuries, ever since she got blamed for giving the apple to Adam. And the French saying "cherchez la femme." By far, in the overwhelming majority of cases, women are either silenced or not believed. And it is wrong. I don't know what the solution is to that for some people that are taking it, misunderstanding, taking it too far. We have what he said, and we have what she said, and we won't know what the truth is. And when not all the facts are clear, but this is not something that's going to be tried in a court of law. I like what you said, the trial by Twitter. And unfortunately, that is it's a side effect of having open, quick communication. You ever send an email and then regretted it later? And now they have this, you can have within 10 seconds or something, you can pull it back. So people are flawed. People will make mistakes. But I think in the overall, providing a forum, a public forum for women to come forward, and with the Harvey Weinstein case, Or look at Bill Cosby, how many cases it took for him ever to see any level of accountability for his actions. Or even this G character I was telling you about, Jerbash Shalal. You look him up, and only now is he being sent to jail after he was caught on video hitting and kicking his girlfriend 117 times. Still roaming the streets free. The I think Willie Brown was his, was it Johnny Cochran or Willie Brown? Some high-powered attorney was his attorney for a while, but the video was confiscated. It was in his own penthouse apartment where he was caught on video mercilessly beating his girlfriend and trying to suffocate her with a pillow. That was all caught on video, and yet it wasn't able to be entered into court because the police didn't get a proper warrant before doing it. But when you think about it, I can understand why the police didn't do that. They had to act quickly because he could have remotely wiped the information. Who knows what he's capable of because he's in the high-tech industry. So sometimes there will be repercussions and fallout, and guilty men will be unjustly accused. And we do, I think, have to make a distinction between somebody that, well, like for example, I have a friend who told me the case of somebody who worked in the company very high up for 30 years. He was highly respected, and he's in a photocopier room. And there's a woman standing between him and the photocopier, and she's of a different color. There is a sense that there's some, there is some tension, racial tension anyway, in the air. But he's asking her to move so he can make some photocopies, and she's continuing to talk to him and preventing him from getting to the photocopier. And he does reach out to her, and he takes her by the shoulders and just says, "Would you please move?" And that's all it took for him to get fired after 30 years. It happened instantly. So I see what you're meaning when you say that it can be, there's that sort of double-edged sword there that we have to be aware of. I guess be aware of it. Understand that sometimes we take things too far. But I'll go back to my original point. Progress is messy, and I still believe the Me Too movement is progress over what we had before, where women being silent and feeling isolated. Now they're coming together and with one voice. Yes, Mark.
So, let's go back to you mentioned red flags and pink flags, and I think
and black flags. Whoa, very bad.
One of the examples that you gave, I think, was a man saying to his wife, "Oh, dude, you said this, at some public event in the past, and you said this about me, and I felt that was disrespectful." Okay, I mean that to me doesn't seem like something which is out of the ordinary for an ordinary relationship, and I can see how the women. People who come to you, maybe they've got to a point where clearly something's gone wrong, clearly they have to get out of this relationship, they're in a bad place. And you can listen to their story, you can backtrack and say, okay, well, this was clearly like a pink flag at the time. But I think about do you have the other side of that data? The relationships where the same events happen, but it was actually not something that was a problem. It was actually real emotional communication.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. And thank you for making that fine distinction. And that is vital to make. Right? Because in a regular relationship, you could say, "Do you really think you're ready for that job promotion?" Or, "I felt you kind of disrespected me," when we were out with our friends the other night, or, "I felt like you were being critical of my cooking, and that hurt." In a regular, because we are flawed, because we will say things we don't mean, because we can be insensitive, this sort of thing is going to happen. And in a regular, healthy relationship, you can say that, and your partner will say to you, "You're right, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to hurt your feelings," or when I said that about the job promotion, I was honestly concerned that is it going to be too much stress, but let's talk about it. I'm sorry if I hurt your feelings. And then by an apology and looking at their behavior going forward, you see by their behavior that they're sorry for what they said, or do they explain the deeper meaning, that it was truly for their benefit and they were expressing themselves honestly. You look at the give and take, the exchange of power underneath the comments in the relationship going forward, and her reaction over time, and his. Underlying the relationship, is there a dynamic of respect, love, equality? In which case you can say, that dinner sucked, or boy, or you're really not ready for that, job promotion, or I hate blue on you, or you can say these things, or you can make a mistake and say something you regret later and apologize and have arguments back and forth. Back and forth, that's the key. Or are these comments being made within a context of fear, shame, manipulation, humiliation? That's what you look at, the underlying dynamic that you only see expressed over time. These isolated things we're talking about, the comment about what she's wearing, is she ready for the job promotion, these are snapshots of the relationship. But to get the whole picture, you've got to watch the whole movie and see the context. Okay, oh, yeah,
Maybe
I think I'm, okay.
How about in the homosexual community?
How about it? Well, it happens at about the same rate, if not higher, and there's even more stigma attached to it because it's the movement that's happening now, and we don't want to say anything that's going to disparage the movement or make the movement look bad. So there is abuse, that horrible abuse that happens, just like in the regular heterosexual community, and yet in a way they are even more isolated. Fewer resources for men and gay men when they are trying to escape an abusive relationship. Okay, thank you so much. Thank you everybody for your great questions.